Story 1. My father, a quintessential baby boomer born in the 1950s, used to believe that young people were not willing to work as hard. He was the first person from his working-class car factory family to attend university, and I would not say he was ever really handed anything. However, a couple of years ago, my partner and I were in the process of buying a house, and he was surprised when I told him how much our mortgage would be. He said we were buying beyond our means, but I then asked him to find a house at a price he thought was acceptable. He took that as a challenge, as he always would, and came back hours later saying he had been looking at house prices and they were all ridiculous. He and my mother bought their first flat together in 1980. At that time, their total income was around £11,000, and the flat cost £25,000. Our mortgage is close to 6 times our combined income, which is much better than most for our age. He changed his opinion after that, and in the last local elections, he asked his candidate what their policy was on rising house prices. Story 2. Boomer here. I see a generation that cares about mental health, fairness, and not wasting life on busy work. Attention gets scattered sometimes. Sure, but your empathy and grit give me real hope. Keep pushing and we will catch up. Story 3. My parents are baby boomers. They know things are more expensive now, especially with Generation Z grandchildren bringing issues to their attention. However, they also think Generation Z is not willing to work as hard and sacrifice for financial stability as they were. Story 4. As a Generation X, I have never understood the baby boomer complaint that millennials are lazy. The millennial friends or team members I have known over the years have been absolute grinders who worked side hustles and extra gigs and developed creative ideas to improve their ability to have a good life. Wanting to figure out how to be happy and not work yourself to death is not lazy. It is smart. Story 5. I asked my father, and he says his generation needs to get out of the way. He is quite disappointed in his cohort. Story 6. Not mine, but my dad calls his baby boomer generation the gimme generation. Story 7. I'm not sure the stereotype is necessarily that they ruined the economy. It is more nuanced. They paid for college with minimum wage part-time summer jobs, then bought their first homes with a handshake and a promise to bake the sellers a pie. Now they act like young people cannot afford to buy that $1.3 million house from them because everyone under 60 is lazy. Story 8. My take is that the baby boomer generation was the exception to the rule, and we have been lulled into thinking their version of prosperity is the norm. It is not. If you look at American history, we have been mostly poor with a few wealthy people running everything. That is how it has been. We are in the process of reverting back to the default settings. Story 9. The boomers on Nextdoor constantly create topics praising themselves for how hard they had it in the past compared to younger generations. They receive many similar comments, most of which begin with, "I've lived here for years." Story 10. Generation blaming is garbage, but I would say most of this is a reaction to baby boomers telling younger generations to pull themselves up by their bootstraps or stop buying avocado toast or lattes. School and housing costs are 7 times what they paid, yet they are blaming millennials for killing Red Lobster. They also cut education taxes, which eliminated home economics and shop classes, and they wonder why their kids are not self-sufficient. Story 11. I am a boomer, born in 1946. Yes, I worked hard and faced many challenges throughout my working life, but so do young people nowadays. At heart, I have always been a socialist, environmentalist, and accepting of all sexual orientations. Frankly, I do not think I was an outlier. Most of the people I associated with shared the same beliefs. We always voted as far left as possible and saw civil rights laws take hold, as well as protections for people with disabilities, environmental protections, and the end of the Vietnam War. We opposed Reagan and the Bush family. I do not feel I destroyed the economy for the younger generation. I simply lived my life honestly, mindful of those who were less fortunate. I understand why some younger people blame boomers, just as people my age blamed older generations for the difficult times of the 1960s. I can tolerate the criticism, but it is misguided. The problems of today were not caused by the vast majority of boomers. They are systemic problems resulting from an underregulated capitalist economic system and a political system that is outdated and fails to respond to changing times. I personally understand the anger of younger people and I encourage it. I would be hypocritical to take offense, since I once felt anger toward my parents' generation for their conservative political and religious views. Story 12. As a baby boomer, I am more disappointed in the conservative decline of my generation. It seems like the age of Aquarius went the way of the Bronze Age. Story 13. Giving generations certain characteristics is a divisive tactic to cause trouble between the generations. If we are divided, then we are conquered by groups more powerful, with only their interests prevailing. I am a baby boomer, and I never subscribed to or acted like the usual depiction of my generation, nor do my friends act like the typical baby boomers. I have lived a long time and have seen power and wealth seekers of all generations trying to divide the general population so they can benefit and become more powerful and much richer. Look at how divided we become because of fighting about social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, women presidents, racism, ageism, and immigration, to name a few. All of these supposed dividers influence people to separate and form camps that distrust each other. Meanwhile, many of our freedoms, values, ability to generate wealth, education, and health are being eroded and monetized, so the general health and welfare of our nation decline, while a certain powerful few rise astronomically. Hopefully, more people will see the light, stop believing in division, and start working together to make a more perfect union, as our preamble to the United States Constitution challenged us to do. Story 14. My dad is a baby boomer. I am Generation X. He was living a middle-class life in Uganda until Idi Amin came to power. They took everything. He arrived in Canada with nothing in 1973. He is the hardest working person I know. He rebuilt his life and is now reaping the rewards. I blame him for nothing, and he will readily say the current generation has it bad. There are a lot of immigrant baby boomer stories like his, I imagine. Story 15. I am Generation X, and I would love to blame the baby boomers for everything, but in reality, the real problem we are having right now is private equity firms like Blackstone buying up whole neighborhoods and letting the houses stay vacant to increase their market capitalization. Story 16. Boomer here. There is some justification to that statement. However, to a great degree, boomers have been affected by the same financial forces beyond their control as everyone else. They just got lucky, mostly due to timing, and have confused luck with virtue. Story 17. My parents are aware on one hand but blind on the other. My parents were never rich but retired very well with their pensions and Social Security. When I brought up the fact that my pension will be a fraction of theirs and Social Security may not be available when I reach retirement age, my mom just focuses on how good she has it, not offering sympathy or awareness. She once defended her pension and Social Security, saying she worked hard for both. And I did not. Story 18. I am technically a baby boomer or Generation X and have been a socialist my whole life. A real socialist, that is, voting for left-wing parties in my country and politically active in women's and animal rights movements as well. For the last few years, I have participated in movements to promote basic income policy. Therefore, I do not feel attacked personally. That said, I truly believe that all civilized countries should have an age limit on critical executive and judicial positions. Everyone should be forced to retire by age 70 at the latest. If you want to be involved after that age, fine, go mentor younger cohorts. Wisdom comes with age sometimes, but at a certain point, you become too distant to understand the needs of younger generations, and you should make room for them. Too many from my generation are stuck in the past and think they know it all. And you know what? I work at a university, and I learn as much from the young people as they learn from me. Story 19. Well, to be honest, the generation before us was worse. We baby boomers didn't put lead in the gasoline and in the paint cans. That all happened before we got here. To be honest, the greatest generation was not that great. They cheated on their wives, beat their children, and took advantage of others in business. And then they would go to church, the hypocrites. Things got worse under President Ronald Reagan and his associates. They were the ones who deregulated and caused the damage. The wealthy took from the poor, and trickle-down economics proved to be ineffective. So, yes, baby boomers deserve criticism, but we did not start the fire. Our nation's downward trajectory is mostly a matter of class conflict. And that has been happening for generations. Story 20. I feel that sweeping generalizations about any group are not accurate. For example, not all teenagers are criminals, not all doctors are focused solely on making money, and not all members of the baby boomer generation are selfish. Every group includes a wide variety of individuals. Story 21. Some of the criticism is legitimate and some of it is not. The thing is, most of what we baby boomers did is just human nature, and any generation would have done the same. My big complaint is the hypocrisy we have shown over the years. All that 1960s talk but no action. Sorry we are leaving the world such a mess for you all. Story 22. Are baby boomers even on Reddit? My parents are baby boomers and they understand that they are old. They often say they are tired of seeing people their age become politicians. My dad is very sharp, built a successful business from scratch and says, I can't run it now like I did 10 years ago. Story 23. Pretty obvious ignorant ageist bigotry. We were famously quoted as saying, don't trust anyone under 30, which of course we did not adhere to. We were also given the harsh choice of being sent to Vietnam to kill and be killed or go to prison, which was a little different from being out of work. People are mistaken if they think any particular generation is ever in charge, as the powers that be change in age, but their motives remain the same. The wealthy and powerful have been in charge since well before the Roman Empire. Younger people have the worst voter turnout of any age group, and those who do not vote complain as much as anyone. Maybe it is the worst they have ever seen, but it is going to get a lot worse due to the White House, as this is intentional. Right now, unemployment is 4.2%. It has been over 7% or higher 7 times since the 1950s, and was over 10% when I got out of school. I had to do manual labor, then retail, then an entry-level insurance job, and finally got a good job in my mid-20s. The position of the White House is that you voted for massive federal layoffs, a trade war, massive and expensive deportations, and hundreds of billions in higher taxes in the form of tariffs. John F. Kennedy said a rising tide raises all boats. The wealthy people supporting Donald Trump are not in favor of improving the prospects of the majority of the population because they view their greater opportunity in economic decline. This allows them to buy assets for pennies on the dollar, reduce labor costs, reduce interest expenses, and see gains in the value of bonds they hold. The bond market is larger than the stock market. Remember this quote by Donald Trump in 1996 about a potential crash in the real estate market. I sort of hope that happens because then people like me would go in and buy, if you're in a good cash position, which I'm in a good cash position today, then people like me would go in and buy like crazy. 10 of the last 11 recessions began during a Republican administration. This is not a coincidence. It is policy. Story 24. Baby boomers did not cause it. Oligarchs and multinational companies did. Story 25. Millennial here. I have been listening to baby boomers criticize my generation all my life. Story 26. It will be funny if the next generation blames millennials and Generation Z for not boycotting Amazon, not stopping tech billionaires, or allowing Donald Trump to happen. Many of them did not vote after all. This might be unpopular, but I think every single person here would have done the same back then. Who wouldn't buy a house if they could? Who here would give up ordering takeout or shopping online all the time? It is not a generational thing. It is a human thing. There is always a spectrum. There are always people fighting for minorities, equal rights, and the environment. Young people sometimes sound like they invented those things. Story 27. I'm not a baby boomer, but I'm very close. Honestly, lumping everyone into a category such as baby boomer, millennial, Generation Z, and so on is ludicrous. That being said, I'm not sure what personal responsibility I or we are supposed to have here. I have always voted for the Democratic Party and, as far as I know, have never done anything to specifically impact the economy one way or the other. The real villains here are large corporations and the politicians who work for them. My parents' house increased in value exponentially from when they bought it, and I have benefited greatly from that. But I did nothing to make that happen. It just occurred over the course of decades in which I had no influence on policy beyond my vote. Blaming baby boomers, labeling Generation Zers as lazy, all of that is unproductive. Story 28. I think it is not fair to lump all people into one group. Do Generation Z, Millennials, and others appreciate the names and labels assigned to them? Why would you accept a flat-out assumption about someone you have never met? It is another attempt by those who control the narrative to push a culture war, so you do not pay attention to the class war that is really behind all your misery. There are terrible people in each cohort. There are also wonderful people in each cohort. Personally, I think outrage projected at the billionaire class of wealth hoarders would be in all our best interests. Story 29. It is not the baby boomers. It is the billionaires. Do not be distracted by who is to blame. Story 30. Is anyone aware that some baby boomers were working class, still are working class, and have suffered the usual trials and tribulations that come with poverty and negligible social status in our class-ridden neoliberal society? Story 31. I am one of the younger baby boomers. I do not recall ever weighing in on what gets built or does not get built or what the market does. Nobody ever asked me what interest rates should be. I do the same things most everyone does. Go to work, come home, make dinner, watch television, go to bed, and do it all over again 5 days a week. I have lived in a few different cities, with Los Angeles being the one I lived in the longest. Housing has gotten expensive over the past 20 years, and what caused it to get so crazy in the past 5 years, I am not sure. Will it stay like this? Probably not. Story 32. I feel that my generation has been targeted to the delight of greedy corporations and banks. Instead of blaming companies with multimillion-dollar chief executive officer salaries, it is easier to point the finger at the middle-class people who work their whole lives. No, we are not the 1%ers. We are hoping to have enough money to cover our care as we age. Story 33. I am a late boomer, born in 1960. I understand that the leadership of my generation made some serious mistakes, but all I ever did was work 40 to 60 hours a week for almost 40 years, support my family, and finally retire in peace. I am a dedicated liberal who has never voted for a Republican. It upsets me when I am personally blamed for actions taken by the super rich and powerful of my generation. I recognize that I had opportunities that many in later generations did not have, but that was not my fault. Story 34. As a teacher from Texas, I just chuckle. In my first few years, I was down to eating beans by the end of the month. Young people seem to think we all were able to buy houses at 20, but I did not own my first home until I was 40, and only then because my dad left me an inheritance. I worked and lived frugally and saved what I could during those first 20 years. I made do with my mom's hand-me-down sheets and my grandmother's quilt. I do not think younger generations would make do, as it does not fit their aesthetic. I think part of the problem is many of them grew up in homes that reflected the economic prosperity of the time, with parents near the top of their earning potential. That is their expectation, not the poorly furnished, roach-infested starter apartments with 3 other roommates that most of us older individuals started out in. Story 35. Silly me, I thought this was a question for older generations. Just another negative thread about older generations. I know, downvote me into oblivion. Story 36. My father finally agreed that being poor was a systemic problem versus a moral failing a few years ago. Story 37. Oh yes, there was a big meeting on this back in 1968. It was all agreed how we were going to do it. The plan worked as expected. However, I was 9 years old, so please disregard this information. Story 38. My boomer father has always said that the worst thing in any generation's life is their parents because they forget what it is like to be young, to have your whole future in front of you, and how hard it gets. They speak nostalgically about how hard they worked, when the chances are that most had help. My parents bought their house for $47,000 in 1977. They were helped with down payments by their parents after they got married. It is now worth $825,000. I am a Zennial and I still rent with my family of 4. Things are absolutely not the same. Story 39. Tail end boomer here, but by the time we young adults came into adulthood, the party was over. I still have my children living at home, and they are well into adulthood. My silent generation or traditionalist generation father cannot understand why young people are not out on their own as soon as they graduate from high school. I have given up explaining to him why. The opportunities are different, the economy is different. No one in their right mind can expect the old nose to the grindstone method to work. Wages have not kept up with the cost of living, and there is a whole cohort of the workforce willing to work for very low wages, keeping those wages down. Many positions are filled using networking and connections, rather than applying through traditional methods. Go ahead and blame my generation for what is wrong. I have not reaped the benefits that the original poster is talking about. Story 40. Well, I am a lifelong renter because I have lived paycheck to paycheck my whole life, so honestly, I do not understand how people are upset. I mean, what were they supposed to be doing? Most people just live their lives unaware, simply trying to get by. Story 41. To their credit, baby boomers were smart enough not to support Donald Trump the second time. Their children were deceived twice. Story 42. It is not necessarily all our generation. I would look at other causes as well, such as corporate greed. There used to be more parity between the chief executive suite and the workers. It is now way out of control. Look at billionaires hoarding wealth. Trickle-down economics is a complete scam. Citizens United has done an incredible amount of damage to this country. They are doing a great job of making us point fingers at each other instead of focusing on the class wars we should be fighting. Story 43. The criticism is disinformation, propaganda, and a tactic to distance the younger generation from their support systems. It makes them more vulnerable and destroys families, but it is an easy scapegoat for a younger generation that needs to rely on multigenerational support. It is not the baby boomers. It is the Republicans and hostile foreign powers trying to harm democracy, specifically the United States. Story 44. Maybe I'm biased because most of the baby boomers I know are well aware of the reality of life for younger generations, but as a millennial, I think the whole generational division and anger at each other is one more attempt at dividing the working class. Keep othering groups of people so we cannot unite and see where the real problems are coming from. Story 45. Yes, all 76 million of us had a large meeting to discuss this and decided what the heck. Actually, it all started in the 1980s. It was called the Me Decade. Somehow, it became permanent. I was not a fan. Story 46. I am 63 years old. I think the younger generations are fantastic. I respect their tolerance and openness to new ideas. The only thing that bothers me about the newer generations is that they tolerate the status quo in politics. It is your country. Run it how you want. Story 47. I like how most of the answers are just more people complaining about the older generation. Story 48. I am Generation X, just waiting my turn to be blamed, knowing that every generation is blamed by the youngest generation for destroying the world. Story 49. I do not know. Generation Z did plenty of damage in the last election. Story 50. As a baby boomer, I almost always had 2 jobs. Then I got a job in construction. I learned how to build a house and built one after work and every weekend. Vacations never happened until I was around 40. It was not really as easy as people make it out to be. I am not complaining. I thought that was how you got ahead. Story 51. Not a baby boomer, early Generation X. Bought my first house 5 years ago. 20 years ago, my silent generation father did not believe me when I said I could not afford a house in the California Bay Area until I cut out the real estate pages from a newspaper and mailed them to him. Story 52. I'm curious why the blame is placed on the baby boomer generation. Capitalism is responsible for the rising cost of everything. I support affordable living and blame politicians for not taking action. I had a conversation with a coworker who argued against me, stating it is a free market and blamed the population for paying ridiculous amounts for homes. He said people could reset the market by not buying any home listed over $300,000. The problem is real estate investment firms are outbidding new families. I believe politicians should ban real estate investment firms from investing in family homes. Story 53. I guess in my old age I must have forgotten my years in Congress and being a key figure on Wall Street. Story 54. I am Generation X and I recognize this as just another page of the culture war. The people with actual power keep finding new ways to get us fighting among ourselves because thoughtful people become aware of the old tropes, racial minorities and LGBTQ+ individuals over time. If we stop fighting each other, we will challenge Musk, Trump, Teal, Vance, and the like. Then they would be in trouble because there are not very many of them. All you need to start a culture war is an angry population of youth that is uncommitted to its values, if it even knows what those values are, and a large enough cohort in the target group, baby boomers, that conforms to a bad stereotype entitled ignorant, clueless victim blaming. Boom. War. But baby boomers are not a homogeneous group any more than black people, LGBTQ plus individuals, or anyone else are. The average baby boomer had no more control over the conditions that created youth poverty than the average white person had over the conditions that created white supremacy. Just as there are white people working tirelessly against racism, there are baby boomers who have always worked against wealth inequality. The subsection of baby boomers that supports ending wealth inequality is one of the most politically powerful allies young people can have. They need to stop stereotyping people based on age. They hate it when baby boomers do it to them, and mobilize with allies of all ages to fight the real enemy. Story 55. Late boomer here. I was not able to buy my first house until I was almost 40, having worked since I was 14. I put myself through college. Every generation has struggles, and it is short-sighted to categorize any of them with stereotypes. Look to elected officials for why the economy and housing market are in poor condition. Story 56. I'm a baby boomer. I worked hard so I could pay my children's way through university, specifically so they would not be saddled with education loan debt, which would have inhibited their ability to buy a house. I wanted my grandchildren to grow up in a house. First of all, the modern economy was not actually designed by baby boomers. We were not in power during the Ronald Reagan years. Baby boomers are the first generation of the modern consumer economy. We bought a lot of goods. I do not know how or if that matters, but it is interesting in some way as we pass on all the possessions we collected to our children. The increase in property taxes was halted in California at least. This pushed up house prices because baby boomers were not pushed out of their houses when they got older, and that changed the supply and demand dynamics. This also made education much more expensive, which impacted the younger generations greatly. But again, baby boomers are not the architects of that. It happened before we were in power. We just never fixed it, and that is our fault. When we were young, we leveled criticism at our parents' generation much as millennials do now. Time will tell if they are any better than we were. I look at J.D. Vance and wonder about that. Story 57. I feel the same way about every unfair generalization regarding groups of people. Story 58. I'm so tired of hearing how different generations are being segregated into age categories. Story 59. I am lucky that my older parents are very aware of the situation we are in. They do what they can to help when needed, and they did not have it the easiest personally, so they have more empathy than those who had an easy life. Story 60. A lot of us voted for Clinton and Obama, who significantly grew the economy. It is not our fault that Republicans damage it every time they come into power by overspending, increasing the deficit, providing tax breaks for the rich, and causing inflation to rise. In the early 1980s, we were in a recession. Unemployment was almost 11%, inflation was over 7%, national debt was spiraling, and mortgage rates were between 11 and 13%, thanks to Ronald Reagan. We did not do anything to ruin it. Story 61. Everyone else on Reddit, how do you feel about stereotyping an entire generation and blaming them for all the world's problems when people are individuals and not defined by their age or birth year? And B, the baby boomers were not the only generation making decisions that are now condemned with the benefit of hindsight as if it was solely the baby boomers' fault. Also, how do you feel about setting the precedent that the oldest living generation deserves to be blamed for everything, knowing that one day your own generation will be the oldest living generation? Story 62. From my parents' perspective, it is everyone but their fault. Story 63. I am at the tail end of the baby boomer generation. I am not poor, but not rich either. I am ashamed of the greed in my generation. Yes, I have a nice house and car, but I refuse to buy an Airbnb because that cheats someone out of a home of their own. I have been saying this for the last 30 years. I have not made the money some of my friends have, but at the end of the day, I sleep better knowing I did no harm. Story 64. I am 68. I bought my first house in 1981. It was 12.5% interest, and I was paying $1,000 a month when I was making $12 per hour, basically half my income. There was not a whole lot left for food, and there certainly was nothing for dental care. The house was just a bare-bones starter house, nothing fancy. Nothing the current administration is doing or has done has made it any easier to afford a house and a stable life on a middle-class income. I do think most baby boomers understand how hard it is because it was hard for us too. The only thing that made it possible for me was that I did a 4-year stint in the military, and that got me a government-issued bill loan, 12.5% instead of 16%. The current administration and the Make America Great Again crowd, along with the elite Democrats, are not making it any easier to be in the middle class. Vote for your best interests, not just what is popular or what some politician tells you will be. Cutting the government will not make anything better. That is just the rich trying to have more. Story 65. First, how and to whom is that criticism expressed? Not all baby boomers are responsible for today's problems. You are talking about a group of elite, entitled politicians who rigged laws and so on. I have been poor all my life. I have never owned a house and I never will. I just responded to a post where the title blames baby boomers for the actions of one inappropriate old man. Like inappropriate old men did not exist before baby boomers. But hey, baby boomer bashing is popular now, and you're not part of it if you don't join in. People of all generations since the baby boomers, and I might add because of the baby boomers, understand that you cannot judge people by how others of the same demographic behave. Most understand you do not do this with black people or Muslims. However, from what I have seen, some cannot apply the principle of stereotyping to older people, also known as baby boomers. So once again, I am going to say it. No one person is representative of any demographic, including baby boomers. And if there is any one person who could be responsible for the condition of the world, they are not your parents or grandparents, or more likely anyone you know. If your baby boomer relatives do not understand some things about the world today, that does not mean they set you up to fail. Story 66. Complaining about baby boomers is just another divisive issue used by wealthy individuals and corporations. If you apply critical thinking, you will realize that it is corporations and wealthy individuals who have harmed the economy. Just look at wealth inequality in the United States. Approximately 40% of baby boomers rely on Social Security as their only source of income. It is wealthy people and corporations that have kept wages low and housing expensive. Stop blaming baby boomers. Story 67. Generation Jones did not have the same easy path as older baby boomers. The early 1980s recession, high interest rates, pensions becoming obsolete, fewer career and promotion opportunities, the Great Recession, and ongoing challenges until today. I have never owned a home and have no wealth. Story 68. I have tremendous sympathy for younger generations and the mess they have been left with. It is important to keep in mind that we had maybe 2 or 3 media sources at best, and that information was more tightly controlled. Many of us fought against poor economic policies, unjust wars, and anti-human and civil rights legislation. We tried as hard as people do now to make a better country, and, like now, we were fighting against a huge corporate oligarchy. We made significant progress in many ways until Ronald Reagan came along. I am sorry, young ones. Many of us tried very hard. Story 69. Actual boomer here, although at the tail end considered Generation Jones, I guess. I had a very dysfunctional childhood. We were very poor, as were our neighbors. I was raised and neglected by a single drug-addicted mother. We received welfare checks to pay the rent and government surplus food for part of the month. I often went hungry. We did not have a car or a telephone. We had a black and white television. I left home and have been on my own since I was 16. I do not take it personally when young people complain about boomers having a gilded life and leaving only crumbs, since that certainly does not describe my life. Story 70. The criticism is misguided because my parents did not cause inflation. The government and central banks did. Story 71. I'm Generation X, and my dad is a baby boomer. He worked very hard and moved the family to America. Every one of his children benefited from that decision. I fault him for nothing. He was never a selfish man. He even tried to help my sister buy a condominium. Story 72. The wealthy are destroying the economy and the housing market. It is not the baby boomers. One group or another always gets the blame for a crisis, But the culprit is always the same: the wealthy, the greedy, the corrupt. Story 73. My mom is a baby boomer. She dislikes the grand old party, Republicans, and what they are doing to the economy, the government, and the fabric of society. However, she does not appreciate the blanket blame placed on her generation, especially since she came from a low-income background and had to work hard as a single mother. She feels that this blame is unfair. I prefer to direct my anger at the wealthy rather than entire generations. There are far fewer wealthy individuals than members of any generation, and in my opinion, they are more to blame. Story 74. Most baby boomers know the housing market is ridiculous. They went to work and raised a family. None of them I know said, "Oh hell yeah, we are going to destroy the housing market." My grandmother and grandfather died not long ago. Their house sold for $65,000. They did not win the baby boomer lottery. Story 75. I'm not a member of the baby boomer generation, but I will comment for my father, since his English is limited. Here is what he said. Not every person from the baby boomer generation lived in the United States during prosperous times. My father migrated legally with his father in 1992 and was paid very little while trying to survive. He only earned $6 an hour and worked 14 hours a day to make ends meet. He managed to buy a property with two of his brothers and saved materials that the construction company discarded to build his own house. He is still paying a mortgage, and we struggle to make ends meet in today's economy. I helped pay some of his bills so that he would not become homeless. I love him because he invested in his family wholeheartedly. Story 76. Things have changed. I am 76. My grandparents bought their only house for $8,000 in the 1930s and paid cash in Ohio. They sold it in 1994 for about $65,000. My mother bought a new house in New York, Long Island, in 1952 for $12,000. It is worth $425,000 today. I bought my only house in Iowa when I was 55 in 2004 for $75,000. It is worth $95,000 today, and I owe $54,000. My grandparents saved diligently. I never learned how. Quit wasting money on things you do not need. Stop buying something because a sports star's name is on it or because your friend got something cool. Save every dime you can. Stop using credit cards or getting payday loans. But do not blame baby boomers for all your problems. As a note, I voted for Kamala Harris. Story 77. My mom was a hippie. Unlike what conservative baby boomers say, she never became conservative as she got older. She started off poor, with no support from my well-off grandparents because they resented her for being born. She worked hard all her life until she was permanently disabled. She hated the Bush family. She is sickened by Donald Trump's existence and everything that has happened since Barack Obama left office. She did not benefit from the housing market. She bought a house only to discover it was practically rigged to fail by the previous owner, who was infamous in the city for improperly wiring houses. City officials had been trying and failing to convict him for years. They hoped her lawsuit against him would help take him down. Every lawyer she hired lied to judges and to her, did not perform the work they were paid for, and finally disappeared, failing to process court paperwork, which led to the scammer winning the lawsuit and her owing him an amount equivalent to the house's value. She is well aware of the housing market and the economy. She has been a member of the Democratic Party since John F. Kennedy and still holds on to her beliefs of spreading love, not hate. She bitterly opposes Republican policies. She often explains to me how government and law work, and struggles to understand how programs like Social Security can run out of money because they were specifically designed to reflect the taxes taken from her. Now, she watches the news every day, wondering if Republicans are going to illegally take away her only source of income. Story 78. Yes, we baby boomers all conspired to wreck things for our own children and grandchildren. That was 100% our intention. Give me a break already. I was having a similar conversation with a Generation Z person earlier today, who completely understood me when I said, humans are a mess. Generation Z blames Generation X. Everyone blames the baby boomers. I guess being a baby boomer, I should blame the silent generation, and they can blame the greatest generation. Nobody intentionally wrecked anything, so there is really no blame to assign to anyone. Maybe the better question is this: how exactly did baby boomers screw up the economy and the housing market? Maybe you are referring to ultra-financially wealthy, but morally bankrupt baby boomers, but please do not lump us all in with those people. Story 79. I'm a baby boomer from the United Kingdom. I was born in 1959, so I am 66. Ordinary people do not really affect the trends that lead to increasing house prices or poor job prospects. In any generation, it is politicians and those with agendas who shape the future. Growing up in the 1960s and 1970s, I was fortunate to benefit from post-war, enlightened improvements such as free public healthcare and funded tertiary education. Did I and my contemporaries, ordinary people who are the vast majority of the population, pull up the ladder to stop access by the next generation? No, we did not. I would suggest that what happened, to the extreme in the United States, is that capitalism became the religion of politicians, leading in the United Kingdom to the sell-off of publicly owned utilities like water, railways, electricity, and gas companies, now run for profit and, having to produce growth for shareholders, standards of service dropped and prices rose. This and other trends away from the public good and towards private enrichment caused higher costs to the general consumer and inflation, a word rarely heard by most people before the 1970s. Greed and government's lack of investment in services for working people have led to the shocking social and economic divide that we are suffering today. I did not vote for this. What right-thinking person would vote to worsen the lot of their fellow man or woman? No, capitalism and corruption in politics, which lead to lower taxes for wealthy people and power for corporations, have caused this. That is my simple view. Am I wrong? Story 80. There were advantages baby boomers had, sure, but not everyone benefited equally. Some still struggled back then too. Story 81. I am the first to acknowledge that I have had it good. I was just lucky to have been born when I had no say in it. My first house cost 3 times my earnings. I had free education, free healthcare in the United Kingdom, and have a healthy pension. I have paid off my house and do not have to worry about my future. But this was not because I am a financial mastermind or genius investor. It is because the governments of the time had fiscal policies and other regulations and laws that allowed me to achieve this. People of the baby boomer generation do not hold secret meetings where they plot how to accumulate more wealth and conspire against other generations, nor do they gloat over how their master plan is progressing. So do not blame us for just being lucky. Blame the government. And just wait for us to die so you can inherit everything. I am not one of those baby boomers who think young people do not work as hard or do not want to work. I appreciate how tough it is and despair for my nephews and nieces who are doing it tough. But it is not in my power to lower house prices, create more jobs, or pay higher wages. Story 82. 90% of the comments here are from people talking about baby boomers they know, and not actual baby boomers responding to this post. People need to learn how to read the original poster's question. Story 83. Born in 1959. Owned a few homes over the years in California. Made good profits. Was I supposed to sell for a price under the market? I am a saver. I buy my cars instead of financing. It seems like many people of all ages like to spend more than they have, and they never get out of debt. Expensive coffee drinks, expensive cars, big televisions, latest phones, replacing them often. Baby boomers do not do that. I think people might start blaming the government and corporate greed before blaming those over 60. Story 84. Dad is a late boomer. In his words, during my time, you just had to work hard for a house and extra hard for a house you wanted. You guys have to work extra hard and be extremely lucky to get a foot in the door. I cannot apologize for my generation, but you absolutely have my understanding and support for how hard it is now. Story 85. My parents are baby boomers, but we were poor. We lived in a trailer house with holes in the floor until I left for college. It took them that long to save up to build a house. Painting all baby boomers with a broad brush and acting like all of them were well off, took vacations, had boats, and so on is not rooted in reality. Poor people have always existed. Story 86. I am a baby boomer who was born in the mid-1950s. I was fortunate to spend most of my working life with younger generations as a college professor. There were and remain a lot of us baby boomers who did not vote for or want this situation. It was much easier economically when I was in my 20s. I knew only one person who bought a house before they were in their 30s. A few bought condominiums. My personal friends were mainly professional people with advanced degrees. All of us had student loans because of the Reagan administration cuts and rising interest rates. But the loans were not anywhere near as bad as they are now. It was still possible to work your way through undergraduate studies. Pell Grants covered state college tuition and most books. You could work in the summer and cover dormitory costs. That started to decline in the late 1990s and early 2000s, because many people were supposedly not paying student loans. Housing is utterly out of control. It is unreasonable. What your baby boomer parents do not tell you is that they had starter homes, a duplex with their first baby, or often a rental. Most everyone I know who bought their first place had a small house. Large mansions had not started yet. I guess it started in the 1980s or 1990s. I think maybe my generation forgot they started out small. But they could afford small. Now you cannot even afford small. Story 87. I feel it is silly to blame or praise any whole generation for what happened during a particular time period. Not everyone of the same age did the same things, voted the same way, or experienced life equally well or poorly. I am a baby boomer and I tend to ignore, laugh off, or get annoyed by criticism depending on the tone or level of vitriol of the critic. Someday it will be the next generation being belittled. Story 88. I am at the very end of the baby boomer generation. I do not understand how we destroyed the economy and housing market. It is not a generation that did that. It is major corporations and greedy politicians, in my opinion. The economy, house prices, and rental prices are out of control. However, many people wanted cheaper eggs instead of affordable housing. Story 89. Boomer here. I don't worry about it. My husband and I have always done the best we knew how to make the world more fair, and the younger generations around us know that. We are trusted and respected by our own kids, nieces, nephews, our friends in that generation and the next younger generation, anyone who knows us. We have everything in common with them. We're old school liberal, as are our friends of all ages, doing our best to do right. There are no young people in our family or friendship groups who don't have a good work ethic. They're in a tough economy that they have to figure out, and they're doing the best they can. We've gifted our kids over the years to help them get started. Just a few years back, when our youngest and her husband were looking to buy a home, they had savings and 2 incomes, but there was hardly anything livable available that wasn't prohibitively overpriced. My husband and I have never had to buy in such a market, so of course we'd help. We've had to assure them that it's okay to take money from us because they view us as self-made and worry we won't spend enough on ourselves now that we're retired. We've had to explain that it was much easier to get started in our day and that we will spend on ourselves. It's just been more fun to help them with home purchases and home improvements. Also, we are not interested in leading a lavish lifestyle while they struggle. These younger people in our lives and us, the ones we know, we are on the same team. We recognize racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, and ageism as our common enemies. I do accept resentment against baby boomers in general. I can only agree with the charge that we didn't do enough with the economy we were given back in the day, and that we who knew better allowed our country to become what it is by not pushing against it harder. Can't be easy for younger people to see baby boomers enjoying a retirement if they can't imagine they'll ever see one themselves. I don't worry about the resentment because it doesn't come at me from people who know me, but I am still sorry that my generation didn't do better. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.